If you've just joined the Africa Resilience Hub for the first time, a very warm welcome from the tip of the continent today. I just want to let you know that the COP27 Africa Resilience Hub is one of 4 regional hubs of the COP Resilience Hub. And we're going to be taking through key messages from all of the 16 sessions that are on our virtual program this week in various formats. And we're going to take this into the Blue Zone to the Resilience Hub. We've also got, we're going to be taking notes, and we've also got a graphic harvester who, Sonia, who's also going to be drawing up some of the key messages that are coming through. So a warm welcome to all of you for this session. And this session is on bottom-up approaches towards climate funding, the challenges and opportunities that African CSOs provide. So David, would you like me to hand over to you now?
I think we can start while we wait for some of the other speakers to join.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. And thanks for having a session in the hub, David and team.
All right. Thank you, Michelle, for the introduction and for allowing us to have this session today. As mentioned, the title of the session is Bottom-up Approaches to Climate Finance and the Role of Civil Society in climate finance. So what we will do today is we will explore, you could say, the how civil society can be involved in climate finance. As most of you have decided to join this session, I will assume I don't need to introduce the need for adaptation, the reasons why we want to promote locally led adaptation. I think most of you would be probably very familiar with that. So we'll not go into that. What we will do today is through discussions from different stakeholders in the, you could say, the delivery of climate change adaptation, locally led adaptation. We will explore what is the role of civil society. Is civil society enough involved in it? Can things be done for making this better? And we'll do that through a panel of different speakers who represent from the climate finance institutions to accredited entities, to civil society, and to government. I'll introduce the panel a bit later onwards. The agenda of the session, very quickly, will set the stage with a presentation from my colleague Steve, who is going to present the ADSWAC project, which is a recently launched project funded by the Adaptation Fund and implemented by the Sahara and Sahel Observatory. After that, we'll have a short moment to have a poll in which we will raise a question to the audience, which will guide further the panel discussions. After that, we'll have a panel. Like I said, I'll introduce the speakers one by one as they're asked to speak. And they will give their points of view from where they stand on locally led adaptation, climate finance, and the role of civil society. After that, we'll have a bit of time for Q&A, question and answers. So we want to encourage everyone to just put questions in the chat. And we'll have 15, 20, 25 minutes in the end to address all those questions, or address at least some of the questions. So please, as we go along, put your questions there. We will be recording them and we'll be taking them up one by one. In your question, please introduce who you are or which institution you represent. And if you have a question to a specific speaker, please also make that very clear in your question. So that will be the order of the session. Hopefully we will have enough time to take a lot of questions. And I think we will start. I see that my colleague Steve now has joined. So we will be starting from there. So what Steve will do is he will present the ADSWAC project. This is ADSWAC stands for Adaptation to Drought in Southwestern African Communities. It's a project in Angola and Namibia, which was recently launched earlier this year, which is implemented by OSS, the Sahara and Sahel Observatory, and is executed by 2 civil society organizations in Angola and Namibia. This will set the stage for the further discussions and give an introduction to the topic from what we think is a good example of locally led adaptation and how civil society can be involved in both the development and the implementation of climate finance projects. So I'll give the floor to Steve. Very quick introduction to Steve. Mr. Steve Muhanji is, besides a colleague and a friend, also an environmental management specialist who works for the Sahara and Sahel Observatory. He's a senior project manager there, and he works in the areas with the thematics of drought, early warning, and water management. Before he joined OSS, he was an environmental expert in Kenya, working for, among others, the Ministry of Environment, the National Environment Trust Fund, and Conservation International and GIZ. Steve, maybe you can give like a 1-minute introduction to what OSS is doing, and then I'll give you the floor to do your presentation.
Okay, thank you so much, David, for this, and it's very good to see everyone here today. I have a brief PPT that I sent over, so I think if it'll just give a brief introduction of what OSS is doing. So if we could just upload it. It's been uploaded, but I can't seem to find it. So I could probably share my screen. Okay, let me just get it. Here it is. So let me just start it. Great. Okay, let me just get it. But as we said, OSS has been working within Africa, and we have built our portfolio and working with countries. It's an IGO. So let me just start this up. Great, it's there. Let me share this, then I can do this. Okay, so here we are, share screen. Kindly confirm if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see it.
Great, so a brief introduction to OSS. OSS is an international organization since 1992 with 26 African member countries, spreading from North Africa, West Africa, Central Africa, and East Africa. Within those, we have 7 northern member countries and 8 African organizations. Also on top of that, we have 2 partner organizations, the FAO and the UNCCD. Towards that, we also have 3 NGOs, which are civil society. And this is where we are probably building this project on. So with that, OSS has the mission and service to support African member countries in the sustainable management of natural resources in a context particularly unfavorable to climate change. And within that, we have 3 axes, which is implementation of multilateral agreements on desertification, biodiversity, and climate change. The second one is on promotion of regional and international initiatives related to Africa's environmental challenges. Last but not least, we have the definition of concepts and harmonization of approaches and methodologies related to sustainable natural resource management. And how do we do this as OSS? Through a platform of North-South-South partnerships, the interface of science, policy articulations, and collaboration tools at the disposal of all countries. This is where we have certain accesses within the OSS, like the GIS units and the different sectors. So with that, I will talk about our OSS strategy and how we support member countries in the implementation of their sustainable development policies. So with this, we came up with the OSS 2030 strategy from last year, which has 4 axes, and it has 2 angles. We have the scientific and technical program, which integrates and concerted management of natural resources. And from that, we have 4 axes in the OSS 2030 strategy. The first one is on land, which is sustainable land management and mitigation of the effects of drought. The second one is on water, where we support to the contribution of satisfaction of water needs through integrated water management tools. As we said, OSS was established in 1992 with its main axis on water and GIS, but now we've moved to the other axes, as you see. And the third one is on climate, where the ADSWAC project is, and it's meant to strengthen the resilience of populations and ecosystems. And last but not least is on the biodiversity axis, where we have development of tools for assessment, valorization, and conservation of biodiversity and ecosystems. Within that, the second part, we have the cross-cutting programs, as I said, and the first one is on monitoring and forecasting. Second one is on communication and information, and last on capacity building. Now, when we move to engaging in climate finance, that was just a scope of who OSS is. Now we move to where we are pinpointing the projects and how we operate, where is on climate finance, the third axis of OSS. So just to mention that we have been accredited by the Adaptation Fund since 2013 and re-accredited in 2019. We have also been accredited by the Green Climate Fund, and to note that OSS is the 4th African regional implementing agency accredited since 2017. So in a nutshell, this is where we have been operating basically with the AF, and these are some of the projects that we are working on. And why we are bringing up the AF at this point is because the ADSWAC project is an AF project. So let's move on to the project itself. As David mentioned initially, the ADSWAC project, which ADSWAC is an acronym for Resilience Building as Climate Change Adaptation in Drought-Struck Southwestern African Communities, known as ADSWAC, which is a regional project between Angola and Namibia within the thematic of food security against the background of climate change. As you can see, we have already our logo in the middle where you can see ADSWAC, and it is being implemented by Sahara and Sahel Observatory as the R, i.e. the regional implementing agency. Then we have, then after that, we have the regional executing entity and the regional and the national executing entity. For the regional, we have ADPP, which plays both the national and the regional executing entity in Angola, and DAPP Namibia in Namibia. This is, as you can see, they are also complementing how they work and collaborating with the governments of Angola and Namibia through the ministries of environment. Now, the main objective of the project is to enhance adaptive capacities and resilience towards climate change impacts and variability in the transboundary region. So to move to why the project is very specific is we have the specific objectives, which is enhancing local and sub-national regional capacities towards the transboundary area, also building the organizational and technical capacity for climate resilient production and water management. And the last of the objectives, specific ones, is to improve food security. Now, towards that, the project, as we said, is being supported by the Adaptation Fund to an amount of $11,835,000 for a duration of 5.5 years. That's 5.5 years. And here we have the 3 components, which is the first one as in strengthening awareness and knowledge of capacities to adapt to climate change. Second one, organizational and technical learning for climate resilience and water management. And the last is improving the resilience of ecosystems and livelihoods. As you can see, each component has its budget allocation, and where the main concrete adaptation actions come into play are in component 3. I will move towards now the institutional arrangements. Sorry, I don't know. Good. So towards the institutional arrangements, you can see at the top, we have the Adaptation Fund. Then we have the OSS. Then at the regional level, as I said, we have the ADPP, which plays two roles. At the national level, we have the national governments in conjunction and collaboration with ADPP Angola and DAPP Namibia. Then we move to the provincial and regional levels where we work with the bottom of the pyramid, the local governments, and we work towards community structures which shall be established through the climate change action centers, the producer organizations, the water users associations, teachers and schools. As you can see, we are looking at activities and the targets of the ADSWAC project. And in a nutshell, we are looking at targeting 6,500 producers with 42,500 direct beneficiaries and 140,000 indirect beneficiaries. To do this, we will set up 6 climate change action centers and involve 160 producer organizations which shall be established, as well as 160 water users associations, the WUAs. In a nutshell, these producer organizations will also benefit from income generating activities such as farming and fishing, where they'll be more climate resilient. Ladies and gentlemen, to put it all in a project philosophy for the ADSWAC project, you can see at the top we have the climate change action centers, which is the first thing that we intend to do within the ADSWAC project. And towards that, you can see we will promote climate change awareness and sensitization to the communities. Then we will build capacities. And last but not least, make them adapt to climate change. As I said earlier on, the 2 main focal points will be the WUAs, the water associations, and the producer organizations, 160, which makes it a total of 340 organizations which span to the local, to the bottom of the pyramid, the farmers, the fishermen, who will set up these organizations. And once this is done, they will be able to have improved and sustainable fisheries, agricultural resilient practices, access water and use of water resources, as well as income generating activities, and last but not least, the improved livestock production. This is just a snippet of what the ADSWAC project is intending to do and will do within Namibia and Angola. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your attention, and I will give back the ball to David. Thank you. David, back to you.
Thank you very much, Steve, for the brief introduction to OSS and the role of OSS in climate finance in Africa, and for the quick introduction to the ADSWAC project. Building on the ADSWAC project in Angola and Namibia, we have brought together a panel of speakers here from different angles, who come into the subject from different angles. I think the ADSWAC project is a good example of locally led adaptation, as the 160 communities will be developing local adaptation plans and adapt their production to the changing climates. From our point of view, the role of civil society in locally led adaptation is important, maybe to say crucial, as they stand closer to communities and people than international funding organization does, than international entity does, than even national governments do. We'll explore that question a bit further in a bit in the panel, but first we want to put up a poll to the audience to get a bit of a feel of what you think as participants in respect to civil society's access to climate finance. So right now in the chat, they're putting the link to the poll in. It's on Mentimeter, so it's www.menti.com. You can enter there, and then you have to enter the code that is put on by the organizers right now in the chat. So if you could, we'll just take a minute to take it there. And the question we wanted to ask, I don't know if the organizers will put up the question now or how we should do. Okay, so before we go into the panel, we wanted to kind of understand from all the participants here who probably have very important roles in local adaptation, what they think of civil society's access to climate finance. So the question we raise is, what do you think are the main barriers that CSOs face when accessing climate finance? The options we have put is institutional barriers, limited capacity or knowledge at CSO level, financial or time constraints, the technical requirements of the climate funds are too demanding, or there's a language barrier, or maybe there are other barriers. So you can see that everyone is voting. It seems like people think it's technically quite demanding to do those projects. While we look at the votes coming in, let me remind everyone that we will have a Q&A session at the end. So if you have any questions, maybe already to Steve and his presentation, or to what the speakers will be explaining over the next hour, please put your questions in the chat, and we will record the questions and try to answer them when we get to the Q&A session in the end. In your question, please identify which institution you represent, and if you have a question to a specific speaker, also identify that in the question. There will also be the possibility to raise your hand and ask questions live if time allows. Okay, so I think we're more or less reaching the end of the voting. So I think what we can conclude here is that there's kind of consensus on the issue that there is the technical requirements of the proposals, and there seems to be like a dual thought on this. Like, one is that either the requirements from the donor side or from international side are too demanding for civil society to access, and the other point of view is that the CSOs themselves have limited capacity on climate finance or on adaptation. So I think it's kind of the same answer, just with a different point of view. But we'll explore that a bit further in our panel. You can stop sharing the screen, I think. Thank you very much to the organizers. From there on, we'll go into a panel discussion, and I'll stop speaking and give the words to people who have much more experience and expertise in the field. So our panel today represents different actors in the chain of delivery of adaptation. We have two speakers from the Climate Finance Institution. So we have someone speaking from the Adaptation Fund and someone that's Farayi, and we have Chris Dickinson, who is representing the Green Climate Fund here. Then we have a speaker from civil society, which is my colleague Evaristo Waya, who will speak from ADPP Angola. We have the government of Angola, represented by Dr. Giza Martins. And then we have two direct access entities that are accredited to GCF, and that is OSS, already introduced by Steve, and which will be further represented by Khaoula Jaoui. And then we have the Environmental Investment Fund, which is a direct access entity from Namibia. With that, we kind of want to bring together different points of view on the question that is raised here. Bottom-up approaches towards climate finance, the role of civil society, and we can see what are the points of view from the different actors here. So I have as the first speaker, Mr. Benedict Libanda from the Environmental Investment Fund, but I'm not entirely sure that he's in the room. Benedict, if you are there, could you identify yourself.
All right.
Okay, I think I don't hear Benedict, so I'll go to the second speaker on the list. So let me introduce you to Mr. Farayi Madziwa. He's representing the Adaptation Fund. Mr. Madziwa is the Readiness Program Officer at the Adaptation Fund. He coordinates the Readiness Program for climate finance. Besides that, he also serves as the Adaptation Fund's focal point to the UNFCCC's NAP task force, PCCB, and the Durban Forum on Capacity Building. Mr. Madziwa's background is in agriculture, environment, and climate policy, and he brings 17 years of experience in climate and development finance. Mr. Madziwa, if you could kindly share with us. I'll give two guiding questions, and then you can just speak to the topic. That's what I mentioned. What do you think is important? But the questions I had put is, what mechanisms does the Adaptation Fund have in place to ensure locally led adaptation is at the core of projects? And what is the role of civil society? And then further on, in your point of view, what else could be done to facilitate access to climate finance for civil society? We have 5-6 speakers, so I'll ask you to speak 6-7 minutes, 8 minutes, and then if there are any questions from the audience, we'll take those quickly or later on. Mr. Madziwa, thank you for joining, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting us to participate in this event. And I guess it's good morning for me, but good afternoon, everyone, and good evening, depending on where you are. So I think this topic is particularly important for the Adaptation Fund in terms of our mechanisms and how we operate. So the Adaptation Fund's policies have been evolving since it became operational in about 13 or so years ago in 2008, with our first project being funded in 2010. The fund's niche has been direct access. And direct access to us has meant that we can engage with national governments and subnational governments and transfer funds directly to those governments without involving a third-party agency, such as a multilateral bank and what have you. So through time, we have also evolved and included what we call regional projects. And so the OSS project is one of those projects that fall under the regional projects of the fund. And of course, we do encourage that local level action and participation in such projects, and it's good to see that the project is going well. And that's a specific dedicated funding window that is set aside under the Adaptation Fund. So beyond that, as policies have evolved under the Adaptation Fund, the board introduced a concept, we call it enhanced direct access under the fund. So it goes beyond the direct access modality. And this has basically targeted local level players and the drive to enhance locally led climate action. And really the purpose of the enhanced direct access window under the Adaptation Fund is to empower the developing country recipients of funds or resources from the Adaptation Fund beyond what we have been able to achieve through the normal direct access modality alone. And basically, we hope to achieve this by devolving decision making in the programming of climate finance and in terms of how resources are allocated at the national and subnational levels. And what this means, at least from the Adaptation Fund perspective, is that whilst the direct access window, the board actually decides at that level when a project or program is submitted, how the amount of resources or finance that are going towards that project. It also decides on whether those activities included under that program or project are aligned with the Adaptation Fund policies and can go ahead and be implemented in country with enhanced direct access. What it means is that the screening and the review and the selection of projects is actually done at the national and subnational level. And for us, this means, there is the possibility of stronger stakeholder engagement, including with CSOs and civil society at large in the decision-making on these adaptation activities and their subsequent financing at the national and subnational level. And the benefits we have seen through this process, have included increased country ownership over the project activities, and this basically strengthens locally led climate action. We have seen greater in-country decision-making over how funds are allocated and where the funds go. And we have seen that this process can help strengthen institutional policies, procedures, including individual capacity, where it concerns implementation of local or locally led climate action, including alignment of institutions and organizations to international standards through that process. But I think more importantly is that we have also seen that it can stimulate innovation, because innovation starts on the ground, and local actors usually have a very good idea of what kind of adaptation or resilience measures they need to become more resilient. And with that, actually, we also have a new innovation window, not so new anymore, but we also have an innovation funding window, which can be accessed by civil society directly, and civil society does not have to be accredited with the Adaptation Fund to access that window. Maybe I can talk a little bit more about that if people are interested. But in terms of your question on what else could be done in terms of enhancing locally led climate action, so we've seen that through our enhanced direct access window, we have to encourage civil society to engage and participate with the Adaptation Fund and other funders, particularly during project formulation. There are various opportunities when accredited implementing entities are designing and developing their projects for stakeholder consultation and direct contribution in the project document itself during project formulation. And this is an area where civil society can engage if they are not going to be implementing agencies. But if they're going to be part of the project itself and not providing input into the document, they can also participate as executing entities or the implementing agencies. So there are opportunities to participate during project implementation as well. And civil society can approach accredited entities and have that dialogue at the country level through that process. I'm going to end, because it's just 7 minutes, I'm going to end by just also mentioning that we have a publication that we actually produced about a year or two ago on locally led climate action. The publication is on our website under the Knowledge Management tab, and it is titled Local Leadership in Adaptation Finance, Learning from Locally Led Action in Adaptation Fund Projects and Programs. And in this publication, we explain how the Adaptation Fund is approaching locally led climate action, and we showcase some of the projects that have already been funded through this modality or are using at least this mechanism to finance resilience activities on the ground. So it includes projects from South Africa, Costa Rica, Micronesia, Colombia, Cambodia, and Uganda, just to showcase some of the countries that are already implementing locally led climate action through the fund's modalities and resources. So I'll stop here, but I'm still around and I'll be happy to answer any questions if participants have them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Farayi, for the introduction of how the Adaptation Fund stands for locally led adaptation. Maybe if you have the link nearby to the publication, you could put it in the chat so people can access it. If not, I'm sure they can find it just online. One quick follow-up question. Do you see in the Adaptation Fund, is there a tendency towards locally led adaptation rather than, you could say, bottom-up, top-down adaptation? Is that something you see in the projects you are reviewing? Is that something that's growing?
Yes, so there is a lot of interest for locally led adaptation, at least for our projects, and through the new window on enhanced direct access, we have received several proposals so far requesting this modality. I think the challenge is basically, one is awareness that there are these kind of mechanisms that are available. So for example, civil society might not, and local actors might not actually be aware that outside of the fund's enhanced direct access modality, which is accessible only through accredited national implementing entities, there's an additional window under innovation, which is directly accessible to them, and they don't have to go through the accreditation process. And these are all kind of like mechanisms where civil society can directly engage with the fund and access these resources. And there has been increasing interest in terms of implementing locally led climate action.
Okay, thank you, Farayi. I think that's encouraging news. It's encouraging that the Adaptation Fund is doing a lot of, is taking a lot of initiative to facilitate locally led adaptation. I see there's already some questions for you in the chat, but we'll take those later. I think our colleague from Namibia, Benedict, he hasn't joined yet, or I don't see him in the participant list. So I'll move on to, or back to OSS, I could say. I'll give the word to Mrs. Khaoula Jaoui. Khaoula is an expert in ecosystems and natural resource management at OSS. She's the coordinator of the climate department at OSS, and she works and oversees projects and programs all across Africa in the topics of environment and climate change adaptation. Previously, she was engaged as an environmental expert, coordinating regional, transboundary, and national projects in 25 countries. And she has worked, among others, with the Adaptation Fund, GCF, World Bank, GEF, and EU-funded projects. Khaoula, thank you very much for joining us here. And I know you have your own experiences working with civil society in various of your projects. That comes with opportunities, but it also comes with a lot of challenges, I believe. So if you could answer quickly or share your point of view on what are the advantages and disadvantages of involving civil society in adaptation projects from development to implementation. And what could be done by the donors to strengthen civil society's participation? Maybe these are two guiding questions, and then if you have other things that you really want to share here, feel free. Okay, Khaoula, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, David. And I'm very happy to be here today on this virtual side event. And actually the topic is very interesting, and the bottom-up approach is being more and more brought on the table and is starting to be like a condition for a successful project. Even though some of the projects are still top-down, but if we want to ensure sustainability and mainly ownership from communities, the bottom-up approach is mandatory. So yeah, I've received the two guiding questions, but I don't think I will be giving like responses for each one. I will give my point of view from the development phase up to the implementation one. So civil society has an added value compared to the government and other kind of organization involved in project execution. So I will take the example of ADSWAC project. which is a special example because this is a regional project. We started developing the concept note and the pre-concept since now, I think 2 years or more, a little bit more, with a civil society organization, which has a very good anchorage on the field. So they know exactly what are the challenges that the community is facing. And when we were developing the baseline, because we do a baseline at the beginning, and they were there. And I remember that period exactly was, we were all experiencing the COVID pandemic and the COVID lockdown. So thanks to the presence of the CSO on the field, which, I mean, we're not like having challenges to travel. It was easier to access the information, access communities, mobilize people, talk to them. They were wearing masks for sure. But I mean, it makes life easier than someone who is sitting at the capital or maybe sitting in another country to develop. So the access to information and at local level and access to beneficiaries is easier. They have also the capacity and they speak the local language, because in some countries and some areas, you can speak English, you can speak French, you can speak Portuguese, but still we have the local language, which could be a barrier when we are talking to communities. And this is a must if we want our project to be approved, accepted, and if we want to align to some policies and guidelines, like for example, in some areas where we have indigenous people, you can't talk to those people in any way. So there are specific procedures that the civil society there can ensure, obviously with the support of the accredited entity, which is giving guidance, which is following, but still they are not physically present all along the process. But with the civil society being there, it has been for us a good example and a successful experience. So after this language barrier, there is another positive point, which some and many of the members of the civil society are from the communities. So the ownership and the trust is like a bit already built, because they are having concrete actions and they can follow and understand and then have a confidence in what is the civil society is bringing as a new solution for their challenges. They can also talk to them in a more comfortable way than talking to government staff. This is also an added value. Now, I will talk also about some challenges. This is not the case for all the civil society organizations. As we are giving now the example of ADSWAC, which is a regional project, we are really happy that ADPP and DAPP, which is like the same organization being based in different countries, they are following the same rules, same approaches, they are under a big confederation of civil societies. This has made the regional approach easily adopted, and while now we've started the implementation of the project, there are some challenges, but still it's feasible. I'm just imagining the case if we were dealing with different CSOs. Each of them would have its own rules, its own approaches. Maybe the challenge would be bigger, but still we need to, to have a big, stable, and strong CSO to be able to implement such a project. Mr. Farayi and David, you also said that we involve the CSO, but we have different levels of involvement. They can be also beneficiary, they can be implementing one activity or two activities, and this is the case in other projects we are implementing, such as one national in Uganda where CSO is helping us in the development and implementation of income generating activities because of their know-how on some specific topics. So we have many examples of where the civil society organization can intervene. But the special example of ADSWAC project is that the civil society organization is in charge of almost all the activities being executed, from capacity building, adaptation actions, and sensitization, trainings, among others. And to be able to ensure such a big package of activities, it requires a big structure behind. So we need to know who is our partner, who is the capacity, what are the capacities they have, I mean, technical, human, financial, and then we can arrange and present an institutional arrangement which is efficient, because we can have representatives in steering committee, for example, or involved, as I mentioned previously, in specific activities because of their know-how on that topic, but they can't be like mainstreaming all activities in as a whole project. So these are the advantages. Now the disadvantage, let me try to make it short. I think my time is running. Disadvantage is sometimes the conflict between the CSO and the government, which could impede sustainability of activities. Then sometimes I don't think that the word is correct. There could be like jealousy between the staff, government officials, and the CSO. So we need to find kind of equilibrium between the activities under CSO and the involvement of the government staff, extension service, etc. So this is the idea. This idea needs to be discussed since the project starts and project development phase, because everyone needs to know what is its role and to what extent this role is being given to each of the entities. The other disadvantage is sometimes, as we've seen on the, how is it called, the meta something that we were using, David, correct me? Yeah, it's the lack of skills and capacities on some specific topics where the role of the accredited entity becomes bigger. So we need to monitor, follow up, and provide more support on some specific activities and topics. So yeah, for me, this is a global image. The donors, actually, they are not putting limits to the civil society to be involved in the project execution. I think this responsibility is being given to the accredited entity who needs to run a due diligence to know what are the capacities of the partner to be sure that the project will be implemented in a good way. But I think they are more encouraging this approach, the bottom-up approach, which is based on civil society organizations. Yeah, this is my point of view. I'm here for the rest of the session in case you need any additional clarification. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Khaoula, for sharing your point of view and your experiences working with civil society. I have a lot of follow-up questions, but there's a lot of other speakers, so I'll give the word first to them, and I'm sure the audience also has questions. Next up, I have the government of Angola, which is represented in this case by Dr. Giza Martins. Dr. Giza, I know you're a very, very busy man, so thank you very much for joining us here today and sharing us. To quickly introduce Dr. Martins, he's currently the National Director for Environment and Climate Action in Angola. He's also president of the steering committee for the ADSWAC project. and he was formerly the chair of the LDC group under the UNFCCC, and among many other things he has been doing. Dr. Giza, thank you very much for joining. And from your point of view and your experience and involvement in ADSWAC and many other projects, from your point of view, why are national civil society organizations important in supporting the government or partnering with the government for community level implementation?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for for including us in this activity. I think the answer to this question is quite simple from our standpoint, and that is that community civil society organizations have a reach within communities that governments are very often very challenged to do so. In the case of Angola, Angola is a very large country, very large territory, in a specific area in which we are experimenting in the implementation of this project, of this adaptation project, community-based adaptation project. The area is sparsely populated with multiple challenges, including biodiversity challenges, effects of climate change being felt, and so partnering with a civil society organization that has a physical presence on the ground and that is committed with the communities and has ongoing experience working with the communities allows us to, in essence, extend the objectives of our policies to those areas, which would not have been possible, or at least as successful any other way. I hope I answered the question.
I think that's definitely an answer to the question. As a follow-up, do you think there's also conflicts as in working with civil society as a government, or are there sometimes is some of civil society maybe doing their own things without taking into account government decisions and policies? Is that something that you think is an issue in Angola?
So I don't think that is an issue. It is, of course, desirable from the government standpoint that there is alignment between the independent activities of civil society organizations with government policy, particularly when it comes to climate policy. I dare say that one of the secrets or one of the greatest challenges to climate policy, to climate action, is coordination. Sometimes it is difficult to arrive at desirable coordination, cohabitation, even with other line ministries. And thus, with civil society organizations and other partners, it could be much more difficult, but it is as important. And so, through this project that we have, I think we have devised a number of mechanisms that will, in many ways, ensure that there is permanent dialogue among the executing entities and the government. Through the steering committee and through regular project meetings that involve government at the local level, at the provincial level, as well as the national level, with civil society organizations, in this particular case with OSS and ADPP. I think we certainly have the mechanisms to mitigate conflicts, and we certainly hope they don't occur. I don't see why there should be conflicts when it comes to climate action. It is too important, and it is too it is deserving of this coordinated approach for us to waste any time generating competing approaches or activities.
Thank you very much, Dr. Martins. I think that's a very nice punchline to end it. There shouldn't be any conflict in climate action. I'm sure more follow-up questions will come.
Thank you.
Chat
Thank
if you have time, but thank you very much for being here.
We'll be here. Thank you.
From Dr. Giza, I'll pass on the word to his compatriots and my colleague Evaristo Waya. Evaristo represents civil society in this panel, and he's a project director for the ADSWAC projects, and he works for ADPP Angola, which is the executing entity at the regional level and at the Angolan level. Among many other things, ADPP and under the guidance of Evaristo works with farmers' capacities to protect natural resources, strengthen resilience, and ensure Angola is equipped to adapt to the effects of climate change. Evaristo, we've been working together on the ADSWAC project for some years. It has been a very interesting experience. As guiding questions, can I ask you, how was the process for ADPP of involving beneficiaries, government, other stakeholders in the process of developing the project? And as a second question, what are the main challenges for ADPP being involved in climate finance projects? So thank you, Evaristo, for being here, and the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, David, and also thank you for the opportunity for us to take part in this session. And first of all, I would like to highlight that both ADPP Angola and the DPP Namibia, they are doing holistic development program where the involvement of the community is crucial. And then when we come to the ADSWAC project, we have to make sure that the involvement of the stakeholders in different levels is secured. We had to, because of the sustainability and also ownership of the project, we had on the beginning of the process to involve the beneficiary. We had to involve them because also we have to decide to design together with the beneficiary what are the priority, what is the necessity for them, and also to promote their participation along the implementation. For that, we can secure also the sustainability. And then also on the process, we had to involve the minorities, like the indigenous population. We have to make sure that the intervention will not be a risk for indigenous population, for example. So all this context make the process more participatory. And then our approach on the ADSWAC project, for instance, it will be for communities, in the communities and with the communities. It means that all this starting of the involvement is very important. And also the involvement of the other stakeholders is important because also we have to align with other intervention that will take place in the site project, in the geographical area where we are going to have the projects. And also we have to involve the government authorities because for sustainability it's important that what we are going to do with the ADSWAC project is part of the national or provincial or municipal strategy. And because, for example, when we will finish the project, how the local government will secure the continuation of the activities. And then our approach will be on the agriculture practice and also on the water management. And then, as I said, to the involvement of the different stakeholders as two proposals. One is for the ownership, and the other one is for sustainability. And then I also want to highlight some important points on this alignment with the different stakeholders. I want to highlight the involvement of the Minister of Tourism, Culture, and the Environment, because in this level, this leadership of the involvement also make sure that also promote that the other stakeholders, other donors, other partners came together and design a complementary strategy for the geographic area of the projects. And then one of the important things what I want to highlight is that ADPP has a local presence in the area. This means that, as I said, ADPP has developed the program going on, and then the link with what is taking place already. It is very important because on development you have to talk about just the complementarity, and that's why the project will complement some other development program that the ADPP is going to do. And also I want to share that the involvement of other stakeholders is very important. And for example, we had to do 2 field visits. First, to collect the data, to make the consistency of the proposal, and then we had to come back to the stakeholder to present the process of the development of the program, because the stakeholders and the beneficiaries, they have to feel that they are part on the process from the beginning and also up to the end. And I also want to take the opportunity to thank the Minister of Environment, that Dr. Giza is here, for his leadership, for his involvement, which makes that we come to the end of the project with success. And then also we had to make sure that we have a regional cooperation with other stakeholders. We had to cooperate with the Okavango, for example, Secretariat, because we have to also to think not only as Angola or Namibia, but we have to think as a region, what are the vision that what are the plans for the region, and also it will give sense to the sustainability. And as you were asking about some of the challenge, some of the challenge also we can share that those areas there, the access is one of the challenge, and also the poverty. So what we can recommend here also that when there is opportunity for environment finance, for example, is we recommend the integrated approach. Also, we have to do education, we have to do community health, we have to do other intervention that also will promote the development of the human resource, because the infrastructure, the human resource is very weak, and to make change, you have to do the integrated programs. And another thing I want to share with you also is that the cooperation that we have as ADPP with the Federation Humana People to People, and also the communication that we have is kind of technical support from OSCS, also will make us to succeed to present the proposal and we have approved, because it's a long process, and then we had to learn how to do the process, and we have to share our experience as a ADPP or the ADPP, so that the ADSWAC project will complement what we are doing as an organization in these two countries. And also I want to share one of the barriers that we want to share with you is the language, because as you know, Portuguese is the official language of Angola, but it's not that all over the country people they speak Portuguese. Some they speak, and also we have to make sure how we can pass the message on the local language. And as I said, we have been on these geographical areas for many years, or for some years with other projects. So this experience will give some plus to the actual project. So those are some of the key message I want to share in this first time, but I'm here also for some question or further contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Evaristo, for sharing the experiences with the ADSWAC project from your point of view and from civil society perspective. It certainly has been a steep learning curve, learning to work with environmental finance and climate finance. But I think it's a good example of a partnership in which we bring capacities of different actors together. I'm sure many questions will follow after, but before I open for questions, we have one last speaker. So next up is Dr. Chris Dickinson from the Green Climate Fund. Chris is an ecosystem management senior specialist at the GCF, where he's responsible for development of strategies, policies, and technical documents focused on ecosystem management and investment. One of his key tasks is to coordinate and support investments in restoring and managing Africa's Great Green Wall, surely a project you have all heard about. Chris, thank you very much for joining us at this late hour. I'm assuming that you are in Korea, so it's already pretty late for you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for being here. The questions I had put up for you, and then maybe could guide what you want to say, is where does GCF stand on civil society involvement and CSOs accessing funding for locally led adaptation? And then do you think there's enough civil society participation in development and implementation of GCF projects? And if this is not the case, what could be done to enhance this? The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, and thank you everyone. It's been very interesting listening to the discussion so far. And as David said, yeah, I'm Chris Dickinson. I work as an ecosystem management specialist. So I work with forests, land, agriculture, and ecosystems, and I've developed a number of projects in Africa, including one, hopefully, that will be submitted to the board next year with OSS for the southern region in Angola, next to the Adaptation Fund project area. So those two projects combined will have a really big impact for a very climate vulnerable area. And thanks to OSS for all your support and for working on that proposal. We need to now get it finished as soon as possible. And before I start, I'd also like to refer to Stephen's interesting discussion. So Steve, you mentioned several times during your presentation about civil society and CSO being bottom of the pyramid. So when we say that, do we mean that bottom of the pyramid means they are the least important in the food chain? Or do we mean that if you take away the bottom of the pyramid, the whole thing falls down? So perhaps it's a little bit of both, yeah? They are the most important part of the pyramid, and sometimes they're the ones that everyone tends to neglect. A report on IFAD, an IFAD report looking at global climate finance showed that 1.2% of global climate finance goes to smallholder farmers. So globally, it's very small. That's partly because those sort of figures also include the large sums for energy and other sorts of infrastructure. But we definitely need to improve, increase the amount that goes to smallholder farmers. And civil society communities are probably the most impacted and vulnerable parts of society. And they're involved in all sorts of activities, with agriculture, fisheries, grazing, etc. And they're impacted by coastal floods, droughts, heat, etc. So they're the most vulnerable, and maybe, as we've said already, the least. I think in the Mentimeter, I think the second highest one was the lowest capacity or ability to adapt or to change climate, change the practices of land management. We see in some countries in Africa where people have been practicing the same agriculture system for many, many years. Yeah, I mean, pastoral grazing is a land use that goes back thousands of years, I guess. Yeah, so very different to South America, where it's a more recent land use. So changing behavior is very, very important to reach the bottom of the pyramid. The farmers who are the most vulnerable, maybe they should be the top of the pyramid because they are the most important. So in terms of GCF, we have prioritized, we have a policy to have 50% of our project support going to adaptation. I think now we're on about 49% adaptation, 51% mitigation. And we also have a priority for least developed countries, Africa, and small island states. And we are doing well for programming a lot of our resources to these areas. And in terms of CSOs, I think all adaptation projects involve, depends what a CSO is, but they all involve farmers groups, they involve women groups. If you look at UNDP wetland project in Uganda, it's working with farmers and wetland user associations who are community groups. If you look at the IFAD iGreenframe projects, it's also working with smallholder farmers, youth groups, women's groups, smallholder enterprises. And these are the target groups. And also you look at the OSS Angola project, that's also working with women's groups and small farmer agencies. So these are CSOs. So this is fundamental for every single GCF project. And if you look at the project documents, you'll see there are direct beneficiaries and indirect beneficiaries. And the direct ones are the ones who are immediately benefiting from project funds, and indirect might be perhaps related to policies or wider issues in terms of improved, for example, landscape management or policies and plans. So civil societies are integral 100% to all of GCF's projects. And most of the projects are trying to develop financial mechanisms or ways for people to access finance. There's a hierarchy of financial equity. In some countries, for example, Malawi, the financial equity is very low. Access to loans and finance for farmers is very low. So we are trying to do training and to improve access to microfinance or loans and savings. So I think these are the ways that projects in GCF are helping to get more money into civil society. I think every GCF adaptation project is looking at this. And there was a study in, I think, 2020, I think it was by Oxford University, who did a survey of hundreds of adaptation projects from World Bank to all sorts of donors. And they looked at the biggest cause of failure and maladaptation. And the biggest cause of failure was lack of participation of communities in the design of projects and also the implementation of projects. So I think in terms of implementation, GCF projects definitely do work with communities, but I think we can, I'm sure that all projects could improve by enhancing how much they really do work at the design stage with communities. I think that's somewhere where GCF project design could really improve a little bit. Obviously, we've had COVID the last few years, so it's been very difficult for many activities. And OSS might have some comments on how you go about designing projects with communities, but I think this is very fundamental. You know, if I designed a project on agriculture in Angola, you know, I can look in a textbook and come up with some good ideas, but basically you have to go to the field and find out what the local situation is and what the people need, what they'll do with the money and the training. So I think this is also fundamental for design and is one area that GCF can really increase, improve. And I think also GCF should improve in reporting as well. We talk a lot about numbers, millions, tens of millions, etc. But I think it really needs to have a better communication strategy and talk about a farmer group in Angola and how they've improved their livelihoods. I remember EIF telling me last year about the massive improvements that have been made from the Environmental Impact Fund in Namibia on local livelihoods. And these are stories that I think we need to communicate, not just numbers or big blue sky thinking, but also the actual on the ground information from the CSO group and from the farmers. I think that will help. And yeah, and many projects are looking at community-based resource management, especially in ecosystems for mangroves, forests, fisheries, and forests, and empowering communities to be able to manage these or have some land tenure is also fundamentally important. Land tenure can be a difficult topic, but I've seen, for example, in Vietnam, where there's been enormous improvements when villages have been either allocated as a community group land to manage or as an individual farmer land to manage. And having the security of tenure means that they can invest in it. And also when communities own and manage as a community group, they'll also be able to manage the resources better and exploit fisheries, etc., in a more sustainable way. So I think there's just a few comments. Is that okay?
That's more than okay. Thank you, Chris.
Okay. Thank you.
I think that those are very good points from both reporting, and I think all of us in this room are in agreement that communities and individuals who are affected should be part of designing projects, and that we should all work together to kind of facilitate that. It's complex, it costs money, it costs time, but I think altogether, surely we can find ways to improve the way we are doing. I have follow-up questions, but I'll first open the floor for other people to answer. We only have 15 minutes left. So if anyone has questions, please either raise your hand or put it in the chat. I have seen one question from Revati, specifically to the Adaptation Fund, and I think Farayi has answered the question that is in the chat. Revati, if you think the question is not clearly answered, could you please unmute and... Okay, I guess that means that the question is well answered in the chat by Farayi. Thank you very much for that. Second question I have from Ainoa Mingolara. Question is, in terms of multi-level, multi-scale governance of the project, how will the coordination and information sharing between CSOs and local, regional, and national governments take place? And with local communities and additional stakeholders. The question is not addressed to anyone specific. Does anyone want to answer the question? Maybe Steve, you can. Let me put you on the spot.
Thank you. So how will coordination and information sharing between CSOs, local, regional take place? Well, I think one of the main issues that we need to look at in terms of is institutional arrangements and a very robust communication plan, when it comes to the projects. And a way to also do it is also setting up stakeholder mapping process, which if you're in the project design phase or also within a project execution and implementation, you come up with a stakeholder mapping plan. So you bring all the main stakeholders together and tell them, hey, listen, this is not a project for us. This is not a project for you. It's a project for everyone. And as Chris said, the bottom of the pyramid, I look at bottom of the pyramid as grassroots level. So at the end of it all, it's not us at the top or the ones writing the proposal or the ones getting the money for the proposal, but it's the people who will benefit from the funds that have been gotten to be used on at the bottom, basically the farmers, the fishermen. So I think, as I said, one of the main points would be stakeholder engagement, stakeholder mapping, and also coming up with a very robust open policy where we look at the key players, we look at the people who are relevant, then bring them together. Because we cannot say we are only experts at this level. And also something that we can take into consideration is indigenous knowledge, because if you bring this together, new technology vis-a-vis indigenous knowledge, it can actually make dissemination and information much easier to share, because you don't feel like I'm at this level so I can't talk, or I'm at this level I can't talk. So as Khaoula also said, this jealousy business, it's a big issue, but how do we manage it? One of the avenues is the engagements. Thank you. I think I'm able to answer it.
Thank you, Steve. Are there any of the other panelists who would like to answer to this question?
There is a question on chat about how the financial projects can involve the women. And I think the involvement of the women is very important. And to give you an example of ADSWAC projects, we will make sure that 50% of the beneficiaries are women. And one of the intervention which is very important is to secure the land ownership for the women. Because on those areas, some of the barrier or the costume, some of the barrier is that the women, they don't have a right to the land. And then we will promote the action that together with the other stakeholders, with the institutional government, to make sure that also that the women can have land, right of lands. And also on the education program, we will make sure that also the women are more promoted to take part. And as I said, the level of education is very low on these areas. So we have to make sure that more women can also get literate, for example. And our population in Angola is more than 52% is women. So it means that the women is very important in these approaches.
Thank you, Evaristo. I think you make some very important points there. That there's a lot of other work to be done before we can, or in alignment with the climate action we are doing, such as literacy, such as women's rights to land and so forth. I see Khaoula and Farayi both have their cameras on, so I think they want to answer also to the question. Farayi, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, David. Actually, I just wanted to add in terms of gender. So from the Adaptation Fund, we look at it as from the angle of gender equity and the involvement of women and disadvantaged communities in our project. So the fund introduced a gender policy, or the board approved a gender policy, I think about 2 or so years ago. And the relevance of this is that in all our projects, not only the projects focusing on enhanced direct access, but throughout the fund's portfolio, it is now a requirement to include a gender assessment in all the projects. And while this may sound like, well, there are other assessments that come with projects and feasibility studies and the like, this is particularly important because the board will not endorse or approve a project if, even at the concept note, it does not include an initial gender assessment. And this is mandatory for all projects that are going through the Adaptation Fund approval process. It is mandatory. And this gender assessment really needs to look at the involvement of women, equity issues, and this is not equity in terms of just participation, but we look at equity in terms of the benefits that accrue to vulnerable communities as a result of that project. So we're looking at both in terms of input and output, in terms of gender considerations. So I just wanted to mention that. I think what it does is have ripple effects downstream in kind of forcing all entities to engage in more substantial, I think, involvement and consideration of gender issues beyond just the, sometimes there's greenwashing and just saying, yeah, we had a workshop and there were 50% women who participated or attended, and we're looking at going way beyond that in terms of accrual of benefits as well, and in terms of how projects are sustained beyond their lifetime. What is the involvement of women, youth, and like disabled, disadvantaged communities?
Thank you, Farayi, for the contribution and for mentioning these important aspects. Khaoula, I think you also wanted to respond to this question.
Yeah, I'm not responding to the gender one, but the previous one, where it is about the coordination and information sharing at different scales. So we have two main options and two ways of doing things. I mean, the first one is mainly institutional. So for some projects, we establish regional steering committees, national steering committees, where representatives from communities and different stakeholders sit, and they are informed about what has been done and what is planned to be done. So that is the main instance where main body where coordination is being ensured. Then in specific components and activities of project, we have sessions for information, knowledge sharing, and capacity building, where the involvement of community representative is key. So these are the main channels that all the projects that OSS is implementing or developing are put in place. And in general, these aspects are also encouraged and well appreciated by the donors, because these are the basic and the most easier communication and coordination channels. Obviously, some, I mean, they face some challenges, but still it's the best way to have people informed about what is being done for the project. Then I will hand over to, I think, Chris, who has something to say about Angola, which is very special. Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, first of all, coordination. Coordination is really important. How many projects do something, fail, next project does the same thing, or how many projects have a success and it's not upscaled or extended to other entities or other organizations. So knowledge, learning, and platforms to really share success and failure is really, really important. And GCF does have a regional support program for the 11 Sahel countries, which is quite a unique component of one project, which is going to help support the 30 GCF projects in the Sahel and also GF projects to learn from lessons and from successes and failures. And also with regards women, very important. And the OSS Angola project does have a women's focus. It's particularly working with women and youth and training, financial equity training, and also just building the capacity of women and their organization so that they can grow crops and sell them better on the market and adopt climate smart agricultural practices. So women are very important, and all GCF projects have a gender action plan, but the OSS Angola one's quite nice because it has a specific focus on women's groups. So I think that'll be a really good project when it's developed. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris, for this, for sharing this. I think we're running out of time, and I know the organizers also still want to have a last word before they kick us out of the room. So let me just quickly thank, in the first place, the speakers: Green Climate Fund, Adaptation Fund, OSS, ADPP. Thank you very much for sharing your opinions. This discussion doesn't end here. I'm sure this will continue in the corridors of the COP, offline, online, in many places. And I think there's a willingness from all of us to improve the way we do business.